I feel like focaccia is going to be the next trendy bread, kind of like sourdough, like how everybody was making sourdough at home. So I think you should know how to make it because focaccia is incredibly easy to make. It's very low effort. It doesn't require any special equipment or special technique, and it yields a fantastic result even if you're a beginner baker. So that's what we're going to do today. We are going to make focaccia, and I'm also going to share with you a few tips on how to make super crispy and fluffy focaccia. If you're not subscribed to our channel, make sure you do and give us a like if you will, and let's get your hands in some sticky dough. Yes, this is going to be a very wet and sticky dough because it's got 80% hydration, but don't worry, I'll show you how to do everything. Focaccia only requires a few very simple pantry ingredients like salt, sugar, and yeast. Since it's simple, the flour you use becomes very important. And that's tip number 1. Use good quality flour such as 00 Italian flour or King Arthur, which is available at most of the stores. You can also experiment with different types of flour like whole wheat or semolina to get the flavor profile you like. To make the dough, in a large bowl, combine 13 ounces of water with 1 teaspoon of sugar and a 1/4 teaspoon of instant yeast. This dough is going to ferment for a long time, so it only needs a tiny bit of yeast. To that, add 3 cups of all-purpose flour and 1 teaspoon of salt and start mixing with a spatula. Like I mentioned earlier, this is an 80% hydration dough. It is very, very wet. But a super wet dough will create a focaccia that has large air bubbles in the middle. In other words, it will have a more open crumb. It will also create a soft and light interior and a thin and crispy exterior. So this is what the dough looks like right now, and you're probably thinking, that's kind of a gloopy mess. And yes it is, but don't worry, that's just the way it is. Now at this stage, I'm gonna give you 2 options. Option 1 is that you can simply leave this dough out on your countertop for 1 hour, then throw it in the fridge overnight to ferment. It'll be a no-knead focaccia. Or option 2, you could give the dough a few rounds of stretch and fold to make the gluten structure stronger. By doing so, your focaccia will end up with even larger bubbles and a slightly chewy texture. I've done both the no-knead version and the stretch and fold version, and they both came out delicious. So I'll let you decide which one you're gonna make, but honestly, it all comes down to how lazy you're feeling. But once again, they're both really delicious, so whichever you pick, it's going to be just fine. If you pick the no-knead version, you can skip ahead to. For those of you who picked the stretch and fold version, you're gonna let your dough rest for 30 minutes after mixing, and then here's how you're going to proceed next. To perform the stretch and fold, dip your hand in water and tuck your hand under the dough and pick up the corner and stretch it as far as the dough will let you and fold it over like so. Turn the bowl 90 degrees and repeat. You're gonna do this 4 times, which counts as 1 set. Let the dough rest for 15 minutes and we'll come back to do another set. You'll need to do a total of 4 sets, resting the dough for 15 minutes in between each set. In addition to the stretch and fold, I also like to do something that I call tuck and slap, which is literally what it is. Tuck your hand under the dough and slap it against the bowl while turning the bowl with your other hand. And you can see the dough will start to get more smooth and more elastic as you go. And by the 3rd set of stretch and fold, you should be able to see some bubbles form on the surface of the dough, and you should be very, very pillowy. I mean, look at it jiggle like a jello. Remember I said stretch and fold is a good way to build up gluten structure? Here's the proof. Look how far I can stretch it. It's like mozzarella cheese. Bread making is honestly so soothing. After you've completed the 4 sets of stretch and fold, cover the bowl with a towel and let the dough ferment on the counter for 1 hour at room temperature. An hour later, the dough has risen a little bit, but not quite double yet. You could definitely see lots of yeast activities going on. It's a hot day, so they're definitely thriving. There are a ton of bubbles on the side of the bowl. It also has a very sweet, yeasty smell. To achieve a superior focaccia, we're going to do a long and cold fermentation. This will develop a super complex and multi-flavor for the focaccia. Wrap the dough with plastic and place it in the fridge to ferment for at least 12 hours. I know it's a really long time, but trust me, it's worth the wait. So I actually left my dough in the fridge for 2 days. Yes, you can make this focaccia dough and leave it in the fridge for up to 1 week. And actually, the longer it ferments, the more complex the flavor is. So here's the tray I'll be using for my focaccia, a 9x13-inch pan. You can also use a sheet tray. This will be good if you want to make a much thinner focaccia or pizza out of the focaccia dough. Or you could simply use a round cast iron skillet. Whatever you have will work. Drizzle about 2 tablespoons of olive oil on the bottom of the pan, and that brings us to tip number 5. Use good olive oil. Olive oil is basically the star of this Italian bread, and it's one of the main flavor components. So why not splurge a little and use the good stuff? It'll fry up the dough during baking and make it super rich and crispy. So while it might seem like it's a lot of oil, I mean it is, but oil equals flavor, so just go for it. Transfer the dough onto the baking pan with a spatula and just start stretching it out with your hands. The dough might be a little resistant and keep springing back, but no worries, just cover it with a towel and let it rest for 20 minutes so the gluten can relax. 20 minutes later, the dough should be much easier to work with. Stretch the dough out to each corner and cover with the towel again and let it rise in a warm place until puffy and nearly double in size. About 2 hours, but this will vary on how warm your kitchen is. The warmer your kitchen is, the faster it'll rise. While the focaccia is rising, let's make a rosemary and garlic brine. Rough chop a bunch of rosemary, that's about 1 tablespoon, and some garlic, also about 1 tablespoon. You don't want to chop the garlic too fine, otherwise they'll burn while baking and it'll turn bitter, and nobody really likes that. Add about 1.5 tablespoons of that good olive oil, 3 tablespoons of water, 1 teaspoon of salt, and 1/2 teaspoon of sugar. Lastly, some black pepper. Mix until the mixture is emulsified, and we'll pour this brine over the dough before putting it in the oven, and this is the secret to a super flavorful focaccia. This is what the focaccia dough looks like after it's been rising for about 2 hours. It's nice and puffy, and it's got lots of small bubbles on the surface. And now we're ready for a main event. We're going to dimple the focaccia. Dip your fingers in oil and just start poking the dough. This is my favorite thing to do. It's simply one of the most satisfying feelings ever. Optionally, you could top your focaccia with some olives or literally anything you want, like onions, tomatoes, or even thinly sliced potatoes, or you can choose not to have any toppings and only top it with the brine. And if you don't want any garlic or rosemary, that's totally fine too. You be the boss of your focaccia and decide what goes on it. It's literally a blank canvas. Bake the focaccia at a preheated 450 degrees Fahrenheit oven for about 20 to 25 minutes, but bake it on the bottom rack for the first 10 minutes so the bottom can crisp up. Then switch it to the top rack to finish baking until it's golden brown. Don't go too crazy on baking the top because you don't want those garlic to burn. Once it's done baking, remove it from the oven and get the focaccia out with a spatula and transfer it onto a wire rack to cool so the bottom doesn't get soggy. Enjoy it as is or make it into a sandwich. And that is the 6 simple tips to the best focaccia. You should really get to making this because it's really good. That's it for today's video. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe and hit the like button, and I'll see you next time.